Good morning. This is Phoebe Bosche. I'm the managing editor of Raven Chronicles Press, a Seattle and Shoreline-based press. We are here in the Raven's Roost in Shoreline, King County, Washington. This is the first of hopefully many conversations we will have over the next year with writers and artists we have published or we have collaborated with since 1991. We have been here for a very long time. First off, we are talking to Paul Hunter, a longtime contributing editor to Raven Chronicles Books and magazines. We're talking about his recent book, Sit a Tall Horse, which is 18 contemporary cowhand stories from Davila Art Books, published this year, 2020, out of Sisters, Oregon. I'll just show you the book. This is a very beautiful book. And this is the catalog for the publishers that he's working with in Sisters, Oregon. Paul Hunter's poems have appeared in numerous journals, as well as in 7 full-length books and 3 chapbooks. His first collection of farming poems, Breaking Ground, was published by Silverfish Review Press in 2004, and it was reviewed in the New York Times and received the 2004 Washington State Book Award. The second volume of farming poems, Ripening, was published in 2007, and a third companion volume, Come the Harvest, appeared in 2008. And the fourth and last in that series was Stubble Field from the same publisher. That was published in 2012. He has been a featured poet on the NewsHour and has a prose book on small-scale sustainable farming called One Seed to Another, The New Small Farming. That's published by Small Farmers Journal in 2010. His book of prose poetry, Clownery, in lieu of a life spent in harvest, was published by the same press as Sit a Tall Horse, and that was published in 2017. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you.
Paul, why did you write this particular book at this time, and where did these stories come from?
Well, like a lot of writers, I've been looking for a hand up and a hand in. And the odd thing about the cowboy world, and I'm not a cowboy, the odd thing is that it has existed now for 120 years after people had said it was all gone, that we would be doing cows another way, and we haven't. And the way that the cowboys do it is they partner with a horse. They partner with a horse that is trustworthy and has a certain skill set and can intimidate cows and make them do what it wants them to. And so I was hoping, part of the other deal is that cowboy, there's a mystery at the heart of being a cowboy, and that is that for the person riding the horse, driving the cows, it's economically not feasible. Mm-hmm. You can't make a living at it. As everybody knows, a job that you might only get $200 a month, your hat costs $250. So you can't.
But don't they get room and board?
They get room and board, and
okay.
It's a great job for a young person. But if you want to call yourself a boy your whole life or a girl your whole life,
right,
it means that you rule out being able to get married, have children, have a career, have a retirement.
Right.
All of those things that we normally.
Healthcare? Do they get healthcare on the ranches, the farms?
Probably in a few of them, but they don't. It's not a regular thing, no. And so wrestling with it, here it is. We have a part of it. It's the costume. Part of it is the costume.
Of the cowboy costume.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
You've got to have those boots and that big hat. That's a roof. No matter what the weather is, you need a roof.
Yeah.
And the cows, you could wear, and there have been 2 presidents in my lifetime who wore their cowboy hat in the White House. and could go to the opera or go to a fancy shindig.
LBJ.
Yeah, LBJ and Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan did too.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, how long did it take you to write this book?
A little over a year.
Over there.
Yeah, but and the plan of it was initially something very modest. I wanted to sneak up on telling the story of this one person, the kind of average person who becomes a cowboy because he doesn't finish high school, doesn't have other skills or other interests, and it can be an all-consuming thing to learn how to work with horses and cattle. And you know, like a young athlete, you're a kind of half an animal yourself, and so I wanted this person to have a whole life arc from the time he got into a fist fight with a person he's living with to the time he's the foreman of the ranch.
And and some of the early stories, he's a cook. You know, starts as a cook.
He's a cook, and he's a cook, and the cowboys won't eat what he fixes. They refuse. They're as bad as sailors in the British Navy. They only eat about 3 different things. They eat meat, and they eat beans, and
what about potatoes?
Yeah, and potatoes,
yeah.
And what they can get, but their horizons are kind of limited.
So any fancy thing he might try, they probably wouldn't want to try.
He goes out and finds some mushrooms, and he picks a bushel of mushrooms, and he puts them in a casserole. And as soon as the cowboys find out, and he's 17 years old, and he's by far the youngest person around, and there's nobody else to influence these cowboys, so they just say, and they spit it out, and they're not having any of it. And he quits his job and moves on because of that.
Because of that. Well,
yeah,
he wants to do more than his present position. So if you've got this arc you're talking about, so did the book end up the way you had thought at the beginning, or did it have a life of its own?
It did have a life of its own. I needed to bring certain things into it. One of them is the romance in this person's life, and I'll give you a little example of that so you can see. But cowboys are romantic, and yet there's precious little romance in the lives of the people who don't own anything but their saddle and their hat. You know, it's
not like the myths that we grown up with.
And so it's not that there's no standing. There's no standing at all. And I touch that standing in a number of ways. I have 2 stories that have a judge in them, where this young man gets into trouble at one point, and the judge, it turns out, had worked for the same outfit when he was a young man.
Oh, really?
He'd, you know, and underneath his judge's robes, he wears a belt buckle big as a skillet, considered by some as a weapon in these parts. Anyway,
why don't you read the first section you'd like to read now?
Okay,
it's a good point.
Let's talk. Well, let's do about cowboy love, since here we are.
Okay.
This guy has met a young woman in a little place called the Rustlers Corral, and they're getting kind of involved in each other. At the K-bar one night over supper, one of the old guys, Buddy Wingate, seemed to have had it with the young guys being so noisy and cheerful, and decided to piddle on our parade. He finally said aloud what we'd been wondering, which was why all the girls seemed to show up at the Rustlers Corral. He said, "It's been that way since forever. You ever wonder what's the draw? It's all you innocent young roughnecks that have yet to get your hearts broke." The girls behave just the way you would catching a filly to ride, hoping to find one that hasn't been messed with not a quirk to her, not a scab on her, not a scar. The girls maybe feel like they deserve one innocent, lonely, real man in their life just to see what that's like before they go getting serious. I stopped Buddy, asked what getting serious meant, and he said, think about it. Bank accounts, loans and taxes, a real suit of clothes and a tie, a real job with benefits and disability, a retirement plan. And before you know it, baby bottles in the night and changing diapers. All that stuff you've heard about but paid no mind because you're going to live forever on beans and biscuits and coffee, a wild thing all by itself, way out on the open range. Anyway, just to see
how romantic life that is.
Yeah. And here's this. He's met the girl of his life, and suddenly it all comes apart.
Women will do that for you, or I guess
or somebody will do it for you,
or a cat, or
yes.
I do want to talk a little bit, since this is fascinating, how your family, maybe your family history. I love the note in the back of the book on page 60, which kind of talks about your predecessors and your history.
Yes.
Maybe you could say something about that.
Well, my
pretty unusual.
my family are Ulster Scots. They're from something. Anyway, they came to the colonies in 1730 and went down the wagon road, what was called the wagon road, right on the foothills of the Alleghenies.
Wow.
They went up into New York first in the Finger Lakes and couldn't find land that they liked. And so they came down the wagon road until they got to North Carolina and found land, found community, found like-minded people. These people at that moment are like one of our first wild president, Andrew Jackson.
Really?
Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is an Ulster Scot.
He is.
So, and he behaved like an Ulster Scot.
Trump's hero, supposedly hero. He probably doesn't even know anything about him. He doesn't know anything about him.
Trump's got a lot of German in it.
Oh, that's for sure. Yeah, that's
but anyway,
for sure.
The Ulster Scots, somehow they had over 2,000 acres and seemed to be doing fine. But then after the War of 1812, after the patriarch and the other guy died, they moved west. And the head of the family was Samuel Hunter, who was a veteran of the War of 1812, and he got one of the things that they did was they gave plots of land to veterans. And he got a plot of land came his way eventually in Texas. And they went across Tennessee. They went through the Louisiana, and then.
But then your immediate family ended up in Indiana, didn't it?
That's my mother's.
Oh, that's your mother's people.
My dad's people, the Hunters, were an ornerier sort. They're ornerier sort of people.
Well, one thing when you say Ulster Scots, Ulster, when I hear that word Ulster, I think of Ireland.
Yeah, but that's true, and then it's because so many of them went to Ireland. The Hunters did too. They went to Ireland, to Northern Ireland. They were very staunch Protestants, and that's why they banged heads with the Catholics. And they wound up not doing well in Northern Northern Ireland and came back to the Midlands.
Oh,
And these lowland, what they are is lowland Scots.
Scots. Uh-huh.
And they were in the rolling hills between the top end of England and the hills of Scotland.
Hmm.
And so their housing was different. Their various customs were different. They all spoke English, and the Scots, the Highland Scots, treated them as trash because they could speak English.
Oh.
And every time the Highland Scots came south to attack the English, they ran over these lowland Scots' houses and just ran off their cattle, crushed their roofs in, and erased them. And the English did the same thing as they came north. So there was no love lost. And
No wonder they're so ornery.
So many of those people, they said, well, why don't we let them, we need those kind of people to fight the Indians, you know, which is another horrible kind of story.
Another history.
Yes.
Okay, so the part in the author's note where you have about your mother's waltzing with
my great great grandmother waltzed with Sam Houston at the governor's first inaugural ball.
So that's the part of her family was in Texas.
Yes, her family was in Texas, and the family in Texas rode up and down these waves of class. Mm-hmm. Like my great grandfather, who was killed when he was as acting sheriff, his father was a doctor, and his wife's father was a Methodist circuit riding preacher. Wow. So the family has all these kind of ties to everything that was going on. Yeah,
I mean, sheriffs at that time probably weren't thought of in the same class as doctors, were they? I mean, I always thought of them more equal with the outlaws that they were, fighting, but I don't know.
But we were on the verge of where people out in West Texas didn't get a degree from a fancy school.
Oh, right.
But, we still have a career as a doctor. I don't know. I haven't looked deep enough into that.
Well, it looks like you've researched quite a bit of your history there.
Yeah.
Could you tell me something about your writing practice, what you do daily as far as writing?
I keep a journal, which is really a mental blotter. It has pieces of stories that are true. It has pieces of character sketches that I do. It has pieces of work that I can reuse. But then I get up in the morning and I work till 10 or 11, and then I take a walk. That's been my practice. I've written every day. As I may have mentioned to you, I've been more successful quitting drinking than I have been quitting
writing.
It's a harder habit.
It's much better addiction.
It's not killing me, but
well, I understand about alcohol and addiction.
Yes.
Why don't you read another section?
Okay. A little bit of this guy's. What kind of cowhand I make don't much matter. I can break horses, though I only broke a couple, then learned better. Thrown once, didn't need to learn that lesson twice. I take my time, and if you don't like it, fire me. I can doctor cows, but I'm always set to look it up in a real book, which I don't own, or on the internet when I get to run to town, neither of which nobody owns or should. With a sick animal, I'll always call someone that knows more. A vet, should it come to that, before I'll let the critter die, unless it's plain old age. But what kind of life is it anyhow when you don't own a thing but your saddle, the good hat you keep in a box, the everyday hat on a peg while you're resting indoors, and the upkeep on a couple pair of boots? I don't go home for the holidays because there's nowhere that'll have me but right here on the place, entirely owned by someone else. Truth to tell, some of these old boys die in their bunk beds alone without saying a mumbling word. Around the place I have a say-so. They may even ask what Ben Wilder thinks, but that don't come easy. To speak my piece, sometimes I have to be set to quit on the spot, which they'd let me do in a heartbeat if I got them riled enough and said nothing of worth. What else? I don't rodeo, never did. Most of that's not Cowboy in a show that is anything but. Saw too many busted up early, left no way to even get around, never mind make a living. I got no retirement, no security. Sure, there'll be a government check, but that won't hardly buy hay for some Mustang ponies that might still be free if I'm quick enough to catch one. When it comes down to it, I figure to barely buy beans.
Wow.
That's a middle-aged cowboy taking stock of his life.
Of his whole life. Well, I love this book, I have to tell you. I'd like to see you do more readings and get it out. 2020 is not a good year
No,
to get a book out.
But we can't. Part of this is I'm trying to look at nature. I'm trying to find a new way to look at nature that is not strictly poisonous.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing you might notice in this whole book is about one ranch. Mm-hmm. That's 780 square miles, and they're busy for all the while that this book tells about it, changing the wire from barbed wire to smooth wire. Mm-hmm. And it's an enormous undertaking in money and mostly in work. Just replace take the wire, and then you got to wrap it up, and then they take it into town, and then they recycle it. But this way of thinking about the world, that you poison all the species that are not your financial friends.
Yeah,
that you poison and kill them. It's a terrible thing, and I think we need to, if people want to dress like cowboys, that's fine. I mean, they're going to have it's a spiritual connection to have an honest connection with a horse or with a set of animals. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of like is a thread through your entire book. I do see that. And also coming from a different world, I mean, how the world evolves. You show how the world, besides the main character, but also the world that he lives in, how that evolves too.
And it's the new, I picked a little piece to describe what the world is like.
Okay, this will be our last excerpt. So
yeah, this is as the book goes on, there, one of the things that happens is there's more excuses to sit around the campfire and talk. Mm-hmm. And and we're talking about shy people who don't talk about themselves much at all. So you have to ask them, you have to sweet talk them into speaking of themselves. Here's a kid, here's the freshest kid on the place. The newest hand was Casey Pratt. When I called his name, he snatched a long forked stick out of the fire with a couple tongues of flame at one end, waved it back and forth a couple times like he wasn't sure if it wanted to burn or blow out. When we were quiet, he says, "I'm Casey Pratt, and I was no cowboy to start with. Have to say I come of a good family, middle of three. Mama's a nurse and dad's an accountant. Got into college figuring to do some kind of science, but kept changing courses, then majors. Starting out, it felt like I wanted to know it all, so studied hard, but one dark night saw I didn't want to spend the rest of my days tied to a desk. and couldn't find anything I still wanted to know all that bad, besides what I could do with my two hands. Decided I needed to work at something real for a change. So I answered an ad for a job working for a corporation that raised and processed cattle. I drove an ATV around, if you can believe it, all-terrain vehicle. Through this big maze of feedlots and pens, there was no range to speak of and not much grass anywhere. They told us the land was worth too much to waste grazing cattle. Better to pump the water, grow alfalfa, corn, and soybeans, grind and feed that. So that's what we did. It was a 24/7 operation with someone on duty to keep the feed and water coming around the clock. They had a little herd of maybe a dozen cows with their calves on what would have been the lawn out front of the main buildings, with a split rail fence and a big log entrance for show. That's what had first caught my eye, those mamas and babies that all seemed so peaceful and healthy and calm. But the real business back behind the big buildings was noisy, bare dirt, smelly enough to gag a goat when the wind blew wrong. The corporation looked to buy calves at around 200 pounds, feed them up to 1,000, then process them. They never said the word slaughter. The corporation shipped out packaged frozen meats to another corporation they'd bought with a fleet of reefer trucks that supplied restaurants and hotel chains, hospitals, prisons, nursing homes, and whatnot all over the country. So there I am. After a few months, I know I can't stand the job, though there's something about it I do like. When I sit down to figure out what, I see it must be the animals, especially those nice, contented ones eating grass for show out in front of the office complex. There was something there you couldn't fake. I checked those cows and calves against the thousands we had in the feedlots and thought at least we weren't painting grins on their faces. Then one day, a bean counter comes around to give us a talk on what it takes to make a cow happy in dollars and cents, so we'll all understand how the place turns a profit. And when he's done, I go into the office and give my notice. Then I climbed into my old car and headed south and west looking for work on a real place with real horses and cattle that eat grass like they're supposed to.
Well, on that end, I want to thank you for sharing your conversation with me about the book Sit a Tall Horse, and it's out now. How can you purchase this book?
Well, you can get DavilaArt.org. DavilaArt.org. Or you can go to your local bookseller and just have them order it.
Have them order it from Ingram.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Davila is spelled Davila.
Yes.
And I want to thank some of the supporters and organizations that have helped support us this last year in 2020, which has been a hard year to try to get our publication out. Our new anthology, Take a Stand, Art Against Hate. You can go to our website and purchase that. And in this year, For Culture of King County supported our sustained arts grant through lodging tax in King County. The City of Seattle's Office of Arts and Culture supported us as a civic partner. The Washington State Arts Commission, with NEA funding, supported our project grant for this year. And many Raven donors through Give Big supported us in 2020 and 2019. And just recently, poets and writers have given us grants for some of our readers that are going to read on October 8th for our anthology. So I want to thank you for joining us for this conversation and hope to have many more. Saying goodbye for Phoebe Bosche and Paul. Thank you and goodbye.